Good evening, everybody. My name is Wayne Ranney, and I serve on the board of directors for the Grand Canyon Historical Society. And we welcome you to tonight's virtual outing. The Grand Canyon Historical Society, our mission is to celebrate and promote the study and preservation of the Grand Canyon region's cultural and natural history for the education and enjoyment of its members and the public. And just last year in 2024, we celebrated 40 years of existence when the society was started by some pioneer members of Grand Canyon Village. We encourage you to become a member. Our dues are only $35 a year. We are an all-volunteer organization, and we're hopeful that many of you can join us so that we can continue to expand all of our activities like these virtual outings and in-person outings and our tri-annual history symposiums. If you do become a member, you'll get 4 issues in the calendar year of the Old Pioneer magazine, which has a lot of history articles about the Grand Canyon and the Grand Canyon region. So we do these virtual outings. We conduct tours at the South and North Rim, and you can find it on our website. Our website is very easy, grandcanyonhistory.org.
Tonight, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Kern Nuttall as he presents on the Lee's Ferry Cemetery connections. Kern, of course, lives in Page with his wife, Cindy Stafford, and he's a retired chemical pathologist, formerly with the University of Utah Department of Pathology in Salt Lake City. He worked for a short time as a medical biochemist at the Women's and Children's Hospital in Vancouver, British Columbia, and later as a private consultant in laboratory medicine in Bellingham, Washington. Kern earned his PhD in chemistry at the University of New Mexico before attending medical school in Albuquerque, where he met Cindy. And so they live in Page now, and without further ado, it's a great honor to present to you Kern Nuttall and his talk on the Lee's Ferry Cemetery.
So this is Lee's Ferry Cemetery in the lower part of Priya Canyon. The Priya River, such as it is, that muddy little trickle actually runs along that line of cottonwoods in the photograph, runs from left to right. For those of you who don't know exactly where the cemetery is at Lee's Ferry, if you're at the boat ramp where most people end up, if you back up a little bit, cross the Priya and turn north to Lonely Dell, the cemetery is just a couple hundred yards further up the canyon. So a little closer view of the cemetery. This is a small cemetery. There are only 20 graves there. I'm going to talk tonight about half the people, basically the ones that I know a little bit more about. And I'm going to start with the first burial here, what became the cemetery, right here, just this kind of odd collection of rocks. And another view of it from a different angle. Cindy's my main photographer here. When you see a photograph with just the date or undated, it's probably one of hers. Now, James Jackson was buried here in 1874. And he'd actually come to Lee's Ferry in 1872, basically to help the Lees. There was always, running the ferry was a big job, and people always needed help. So he came to help the Lees, and for that service, he was given the land here. And the land you're looking at in this photograph, he was given that to farm. Now you look at that, and it's a farm, that? Yeah. And actually, if it's watered, it's not bad. this photo really is at Lonely Dell Ranch. You can see the cliff lines there in the background. And alfalfa was a great crop if it got Paria River water. And it was a good crop in pioneer times because all the people coming through the ferry then with their livestock, they stripped all the browse for miles on both sides of the ferry. And when they got to the ferry, they really needed something to feed their animals. So this was a good solution. Just another view of the farming activities at Lonely Dell, just a little more modern view, but still essentially the same. This is Lonely Dell, right there amongst the fields. And this is actually the irrigation line that brought the Paria water to water those fields. And the cemetery here is just out of sight on the right. So back to the cemetery. You see those bushes in the background there. That's actually the water line. That's actually the irrigation line. It'd be worth, if you're up there at the cemetery, walk over there. It's only 20 feet away, and you can see the old rock-lined irrigation ditch. So James Jackson had a cabin right here. We don't know exactly where, but probably on this side of the irrigation ditch, just to keep it out of the fields. And in the cold winter of 1874, he was sitting in his cabin, 36 years old, lonely, and he said to himself, I got to get a wife. So he thought he knew a woman in Johnson Canyon, in the Johnson Canyon settlement, who would marry him. So he took his horse, borrowed a wagon, and set off for Johnson Canyon. And here's the route that he followed. Now, this is just a little inset from a map on Utah Historic Trails. And that green line there, that's actually roughly the route that the Dominguez Escalante expedition followed in 1776. And Jackson's going to take essentially the same route in the opposite direction. But basically everyone passing through this country in those times is going to follow the same route because it's dictated by the topography of the country. And so Jackson left Lee's Ferry, going west along the base of the Vermilion Cliffs, got to House Rock Valley, turned north, went up a ways up the valley, basically until it starts getting a little narrow. And if you look to the west at that point, basically right here, there's kind of a low spot that goes over what they call Buckskin Mountain. We kind of call this area the Kaibab Plateau now. This is the most northern extension of the Kaibab Plateau, but they called it Buckskin Mountain. So he started up Buckskin Mountain. Of course, elevation increased and he ran into snow drifts. His wagon bogged down in the snow, and he unhitched his horse and rode bareback to Johnson Canyon. Well, he got there. The woman wasn't interested in being married, and certainly not to him. And he turned around pretty dejected and started back. Well, at the same time, there was a group leaving Kanab on their way to Lee's Ferry and the Hopi Mesas, a group of Mormon missionaries, LDS missionaries. And as they came down Buckskin Mountain, they ran into James Jackson, and he's crawling on his hands and knees through the snow. He has such a serious case of frostbite that he can't even stand. It's pretty clear from the start, there wasn't a lot to do for him, but they offered to take him back to St. George, where his father lived. And he said, no, I don't want to go to St. George. Emma Lee is the right person to take care of me. take me back to the ferry. And so they did. Another couple days to get back to the ferry. The day they got to the ferry, Jackson died. His frostbite had turned to gangrene, as it would inevitably, and he died of an overwhelming infection and was buried right here, just a different view of the grave. They built a coffin for him. They used his cabin door to build the coffin. And actually a table from inside, wasn't quite enough wood. And they buried him right outside his cabin door. And so his cabin was somewhere right here, 5 feet away or 25 feet away, we don't really know, but somewhere in the immediate vicinity. And that's why this cemetery is here, because this is where James Jackson had his cabin and where he was buried. Now, just a word about Emily, a formidable woman. I swiped this photo from this website here. Of course, her husband, John D. Lee, eventually is executed for the Mountain Meadows Massacre, for his part in the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And afterwards, she stayed on at the ferry for another couple of years. And then in 1879, she sold her interests to the Mormon Church and married a guy by the name of Franklin French. And eventually they moved to Winslow, and eventually she ran the medical clinic for the railroad in Winslow. It was quite a popular medical practitioner. All her patients called her Dr. French. And if you go to Winslow, the cemetery there, you can see her headstone. The city of Winslow has recently put in new footers for a number of these old pioneer stones, as they have for this one. This stone, it's an attractive stone. A number of the monuments have used this stone, but it's a little soft. And so it hasn't held up super well over the years, but you can still see Dr. French. And if you look closer at the inscription, you can still make out Emma and maybe Emma French, and then her dates. So back to the ferry. Keep in mind that the ferry was basically created by the Mormons, for the Mormons, by the Mormon Church, to extend the church influence into Arizona, and also to maintain an escape route into Mexico, because the church was worried that they were going to be forced to abandon the Salt Lake Basin as they had been forced to abandon other locations. Now here's someone who crossed at the ferry in the early days. This small headstone right here in the cemetery. Let's just take a close look at it. This particular Johnson family was from Springville, up near Provo, Springville, Utah. And early in 1876, they set out to settle down around Winslow. And they crossed at Lee's Ferry, and they set up farming, but they had just a miserable time of it. Their crop failed, their irrigation system failed, and they were really worried about facing starvation come the winter. So they packed up and decided to head home. And they were coming up to the ferry from the south at Bitter Springs, maybe 30 miles away from the ferry. And Winifred, a young member of their family, died. We don't know why she died. Some people say, oh, she was bitten by a rattlesnake, but there was no swelling on the body. some people say, oh, she died of spinal meningitis, whatever they thought that was then, we don't know. And the only thing that we do know is that pioneer times were very difficult for young children, and the cemeteries from this period attest to that. They're just filled with the young. The family brought the body back to Lee's Ferry. Emily actually prepared the body for burial. We don't know what the original marker looked like, because this marker wasn't placed here until 1915 by the family. Probably the original marker was just a pile of stones. But in 1923, the family read an article that said there's going to be a new dam in Marble Canyon, and it's going to flood the Lee's Ferry area, and the whole place is going to be underwater. Well, family didn't like that much. And so they came back to the ferry, exhumed the body, and took it back to Springville. And here it is in the Springville Cemetery. You can go up there and see it for yourself if you're so inclined. I'm pleased that the family left that small marble marker at Lee's Ferry, just because I'd be afraid that we would have lost track of Winifred's story without it. But here's a shot of her marker in 1993. This is what it looked like the first time I saw it in 2015. It was just laying on the ground. And then a few months later, still laying on the ground, but it was about a dozen feet away. And then a couple of months after that, it was back towards that first location, but someone had put it in upside down. And then sometime after that, it had been placed right side up, and it seems to have been pretty stable since then. But what's going on with this marker wandering around? Well, here's the issue. Just this little schematic of the cemetery. Let's just look at the 5 graves in the upper right of the schematic. These are buried. These are the order of burial. Number 1 is James Jackson. Number 2 is Winifred. And then 3, 4, and 5. Some people think that 2 should be between 1 and 3, and there's good evidence for that. But of course, that's not where it's located now. There's no body associated with the site anymore, so it's probably an answer that'll never be, probably a question that'll never be answered. And it's just one of those mysteries of the cemetery. Now here's someone, Curly Ennis, whose family crossed at the ferry in 1898. Emmett was, Curly was only 8 years old. They had left from Pocatello, Idaho, going to Williams, Arizona, outside of Williams. And they took 180 days by wagon to get there. Of course, Curly Ennis is a real Grand Canyon icon, long-term member of the South Rim community. He actually started guiding tourists into the canyon by mule in 1907. He stayed for more than 40 years. And just another picture of Curly on the left. In this photo, just a year before he died, he's actually the Fred Harvey transportation manager, so running the whole division. And he's on his way to do an inspection tour. Now, when he died, his obituary actually ended up on the front page of the Arizona Daily Sun. This is how influential and well-known Ennis was. And here's his obituary right in the middle. Now, I'm going to tell you a story, a very short story about Ennis, probably not a common one. But in the 1920s, Ennis was probably a member of the Ku Klux Klan. We know in the 20s that there was a huge resurgence of the Klan all across the country. And we know that there was a chapter at the Grand Canyon. And it makes sense that some of the members of Grand Canyon Village were members of the Klan. Now, why do I pin this on Ennis? Well, I'm going to blame this guy right here. This is George Bolton. He's the assistant superintendent of the park in this period in the early 20s. He came not long after the Park Service was established at the Canyon in 1919. And it was a difficult time for the Park Service because the locals really resented the intrusion of the Park Service. And there was a lot of bad blood. When Bolton left about 1926, as he was leaving, he typed up this interesting manuscript, 7 typewritten pages. You can actually read this manuscript for yourself. It's published in the Old Pioneer. You can actually go and look at the original in the museum collection too. Now, the KKK was not the primary focus of this manuscript, but it was kind of a sideline, and he mentions several members of the community who were probably members. You can look at that list on your own. Earl Shirley was one. And these are romantic figures, but these times were probably a little more complicated than perhaps we have thought in the past. So I've gone a little far afield here just to make my point. Let's come back to Lee's Ferry. I want to talk about Warren Johnson, a far more important figure at Lee's Ferry than John D. Lee was. Johnson stayed there for 20 years and was an important figure, like I say. Now, this memorial plaque to Warren Johnson, you won't see plaques like this on Park Service land. The Park Service doesn't really approve of plaques to individuals. I mean, they have informational plaques that will mention someone, but you can see this plaque at Navajo Bridge, at the Navajo Bridge visiting area. That's the purview of the Department of Transportation, and they don't object to plaques of this nature. Warren Johnson came in 1875, basically to replace James Jackson. The Lees still needed help. And Warren Johnson worked with Emma Lee, closely with Emma Lee for a couple of years until Emma Lee moved on. And then he became the main person at the ferry. And then, like I say, he stayed for a long time. He came with his 2 wives, Permelia and Samantha. Now, polygamous wives weren't always the best of friends, but Permelia and Samantha were tight. And just to show you how tight they were, here's their twin headstone at the Kanab City Cemetery, Permelia and Samantha, wives of Warren Johnson. So here's the Johnson house that they built at Lonely Dell. Here's part of the Johnson family. This is mostly Permelia's kids, and then Warren Johnson there, the Bolt-Wright adult male. Samantha isn't in this picture. When this photo was taken, by the time the photo was taken, the church, the LDS church, had disavowed polygamy. And it left people like Warren Johnson in kind of a tough spot. Here he has this very tight-knit family. It's not like he was going to divorce one of his wives. But he finally realized that, well, he shouldn't be quite so obviously polygamous. And so Samantha moved to live in Kanab. And actually, the two boys in the background in this picture, in the back row, those are Samantha's kids. They apparently didn't like Kanab all that much, at least not initially. I don't know if they didn't like the school, but they ran away, came back to the Ferry, and they were welcomed back. No one made a lot of distinction about whose kids were whose. Well, a couple of years after this photo was taken, a couple of wagons left from Richfield, Utah, on their way to the Ferry, bound for the settlements in northern Arizona. And there was an outbreak of some disease in Richfield at the time, but they didn't pay a lot of attention. When they got to the Ferry, it was early in the springtime, the river was running high, and they couldn't cross. Warren Johnson said to them, "Come in and share my home, and then in a couple of days we'll cross you." And in a couple of days, the water went down and they crossed and went on their way. The next day, Jonathan here came down with a sore throat. And over the course of the next week, 10 days, he developed this thick mucous membrane in the back of his throat, very characteristic of diphtheria. It's a disease mostly of children, but when it gets bad enough, it kills basically by suffocation. Very, very agonizing, painful death to experience and to watch. And like I say, 10 days later, he was dead. About that time, Laura, standing between Permelia and Warren Johnson, she got sick and in short order died. Likewise for Millie, Permelia, Millie for short, to the right of Warren Johnson. And then lastly, Melinda, 16 years old. By all rights, Melinda should have survived, but she didn't, and her death was agonizing and quite long. They gave her all sorts of things to try to break up that mucous membrane in the back. Turpentine, it was not pleasant. We have forgotten what a dreadful disease diphtheria is. We don't have it in this country anymore because of vaccination. So here are the Johnson graves. There are 4 graves right here with a new marker in the middle. If we look back a little earlier in 1971, you can see what the graves look like without that newer marker. This is Jonathan's, and then Laura, Permelia, and Melinda. 1, 2, 3, 4, the Johnson kids. So a close-up of that newer marker the Johnson family put in. When they put this in, they took out a couple of the original headstones, but all the footers are there, and 2 of the original headstones. And they also left all of these nameplates here. And these are really worth looking at. And here's a close-up of one. Here's a close-up of Jonathan's. You can see this was just a coffee can filled with cement and this iron rod that you can imagine just laying around. But look at what care this was prepared and how carefully dressed that stone is. This is undoubtedly the handiwork of Warren Johnson. So let's move on, talk about another grave site here. You can still see the Johnson kids over there on the right. But let's talk about this site right here. This is where Archimedes McClurg was buried. Archimedes was found shot in the chest at Navajo Springs. And just this little map for orientation here, modern map, but it shows all the relevant features. There's Lee's Ferry in the upper right. You can see the river, where the river runs. And then to the south, here's Navajo Spring. So Seth Tanner was actually hauling freight from Flagstaff on his way to the ferry. And he got to Navajo Spring and he finds a body there. What do you do in 1894? Well, he kept going. He followed this route here, which is marked as a four-wheel drive road now. This route actually goes on the Dugway, which I'm going to talk about in a couple minutes. But Seth Tanner actually had to go over Lee's Backbone, which is a much more difficult route. It departs from that road and climbs the Backbone. But I'll, like I say, talk about that in more detail in a couple minutes. And when he got to the ferry, Tanner convened a coroner's inquest, got a group of people together and described the findings and had everyone sign the document. And here's Warren Johnson, his name on that document as well. And he describes how Archimedes had a gunshot wound to the chest and there were still powder burns on the shirt, and how the body had been partially buried in the pockets of his pants turned inside out. Presumably he had been shot just to take whatever he had in his pockets. No one was ever charged for this. We don't know who did it. There was another point I was going to make about that, but I guess you can actually get this document yourself if you're so inclined, an electronic copy from the Arizona State Archives. So a big change of topic here. In 1895, Warren Johnson moved on. Like I say, he'd been at the ferry for 20 years, still his house in the background there. And the LDS Church hired a new ferryman, and that is James Emmett, right here. Now, this is the Emmett that Zane Grey was so fond of. I'm not going to talk about that story, but this is the same Emmett. To the right of Emmett there, that's his first wife. He had a second wife, probably up around Cedar City. And that woman all the way to the right, that's actually his eldest daughter. And then in front of her, one of Emmett's grandkids. Now, Emmett had just an enormous number of daughters. And you can see some of them here, all the other girls and women, except for that little girl in white whose hand Emmett is holding. That's another granddaughter. And then this guy right here, this is his youngest son. He had a couple of other sons as well. And then a couple of non-family members over on the left. Now, Emmett plays an important role in the next story, which is why I bring him up. Because Emmett and John Kitchen were really tight drinking buddies. Of course, Emmett wasn't supposed to drink, being a good Mormon, but he did. And he was tight with John Kitchen, who wasn't Mormon, but he got along well with the Mormon community. He was a cattle rancher from Utah. We'll come back to his monument here. But this is Kitchen country on this map. And if you're driving from Kanab to Page on Highway 89, in this map you can see Highway 89 there represented as a red line across diagonally across the bottom. About halfway, if you look to the north, that's Kitchen Country. And up, whoops, and up here, this is Kitchen Canyon. And to the left of the arrow, maybe you can make out Nipple Lake. And he often called his ranch the Nipple Ranch because of this feature right here. This is Molly's Nipple. Supposedly John Kitchen's wife, and he named the geologic feature in her honor. An attractive young English wife who he had 5 kids with. And here's a photo of Molly's Nipple. And you can actually see this from the highway. So that's in the middle of Kitchen's ranch. Well, the marriage didn't go all that smoothly after 5 kids. She complained bitterly about his drinking and his abusive behavior, and in 1897 sued for divorce. And afterwards, John Kitchen really didn't know what to do with himself. He was really at a loss. He'd sold his ranch as part of the divorce settlement. And his close friend, James Emmett, said, look, come and live down at the Ferry. We'll give you a room and board. And so he did. He moved down to the Ferry. Emmett also supplied all the liquor that Kitchen could drink, and he drank a lot. And he basically spent the summer of 1898 drinking himself to death. I think the family felt pretty guilty after Kitchen died, and they ordered a big, expensive headstone from Kansas City, and it was shipped out by rail. Emmett actually went down with a wagon, picked it up, and drug it back to the Ferry, and put it up in the Ferry, where you were in the Ferry Cemetary, where you can see it. And here's Emmett and his wife. I like this photo in part because it shows that early cemetery fence, just a broken down wooden fence. Now, I was giving a tour in the cemetery a couple of years ago, long before COVID, to a group from Kanab, Daughters of the Utah Pioneers from Kanab. And I told this story, and they said, well, we've got something else to add about this story. And that is that Kitchen hired a tutor from Kanab by the name of Honey. And he came to the ranch and tutored Kitchen's 5 kids. And he also did a little too much tutoring for the wife. And that's the reason, the real reason, that the wife wanted to be rid of her husband. And actually, the Honey family is well known in Kanab and still present. Here's Honey's Marketplace. This is kind of a lousy photo I pulled off the web, but you get the idea. So John Kitchen's memorial there, biggest in the cemetery. But let's look at this one here, John Taylor Emmett. And so this is the youngest son of the ferryman here. Let's look at a close-up of that headstone. Now, John actually didn't die in 1910. He died in 1909. You shouldn't be too surprised to see an error on a headstone. It's not all that uncommon. But what it tells us is that the family members who put this here, it was long enough after John had died that they had probably lost track of the year that he died. And it was probably placed a couple decades after John died. But in that cold winter of 1909, very, very cold winter, the father had gone to Kanab on business. And he took the other male members of the family with him, the other sons. John didn't go because he had a cold. And a couple days after the father left, the cold turned to pneumonia. And a couple days after that, John was dead. Well, the women put together a coffin for John, put him in the parlor, and kept him there, hoping the father would come back in time to see his son buried. But he didn't. And eventually the body started stinking too much that they had to do something. So they took some tools out to the cemetery, but they couldn't dig a grave. The ground was just absolutely rock hard. They couldn't put a grave in. So they dug a grave here in the root cellar, the only place where the ground wasn't frozen. That pile of rubble there, those rocks in the foreground, that's actually the foundations of the old Johnson house, burned down sometime in the 20s. But come the spring thaw, John's body was exhumed and moved to the cemetery, according to some people. Other people say, well, actually, they left the body right where it is. It's still there. This mystery about the cemetery might actually be solved one day if anyone ever does a LiDAR study. So here's another grave. This is the grave site of Wadi Ligon, this odd rectangle of concrete. And you can see his marker, Wadi Ligon, died in 1925. By this time in Arizona was starting to get pretty good death certificates. So let's look at Wadi's death certificate. I love stuff like this. Look up in the upper left-hand corner. You can see place of death, Coconino, and down a couple lines right here, 2 miles west Lee's Ferry. Well, it's probably supposed to be 2 miles south Lee's Ferry, but let's not quibble. And you can see Waddy Thompson's name, and then down below that, his place of residence, Bisbee, Arizona, all the way at the other end of the state. So he was a little ways from home. And then look down about midway, occupation of deceased, minor. He's 73 years old, so you probably ought to say retired minor. And then over on the right, cause of death, accidental, automobile wreck. And then one more line I want to look at, towards the bottom, the informant. This is a little hard to read, but I know it says Mrs. Tenny A. Moon. And I'm going to come back to that name, Moon. This is actually the cemetery down in Bisbee. Look at all these rectangles of concrete. You can tell where these things came from. Wadi Ligon brought this with him from Bisbee. So this is Chester Moon. He was actually running the ferry about this time. The ferry was now owned by Coconino County, and Chester Moon was working for the county, running the ferry. And he actually is the first one to identify the body. When he saw the body, he said, "That's my father-in-law." And here's Chester Moon's marriage license. Just look at this line up here, Chester Moon from Bisbee, Arizona, age 38. And under that, Annie T. Ligon, also of Bisbee, 19. Of course, this was in 1910. Little age difference there. So Anna was actually the person who signed as the informant. Her middle name is Tenny. She more frequently went by Tenny, so she signed that death certificate as Mrs. Tenny A. Moon. Now, So Waddy Ligon had left Bisbee to come and visit his daughter. And he actually had a Model T, and he had tricked it out as a camper. And he camped along the way. One story describes him stopping at the Gap trading post about 50 miles south of the ferry. You can still see that trading post there. It's still a nice historic building. But when he came out of the trading post, he walked over to his Model T and didn't have enough strength to turn the crank to start it. And he actually had to go inside and get someone to come out and help him start his car. So he was a little infirm. But he came chugging along up to the ferry, approaching what we call the Dugway. And so let's just talk about some of these features. This is a nice aerial shot of Lee's Ferry. You can see the Colorado River running from left to right, the Priya flowing in from the bottom, that muddy little trickle joining the Colorado River. The ferry crossing is actually just out of sight over on the left, but you can see a little bit of the road on that photograph. So people would cross at the ferry, take that road, and start up this thing called Lee's Backbone, just the worst wagon road in the country. And you can see sloping up, and the descent from the backbone was actually just out of sight on the right. And it was quite a drop to get back to the plains. It was just a terrible, terrible route. Well, in 1900 or so, they put in the Dugway. And you can actually see this very faintly, this thin line right here that kind of bypasses Lee's Backbone. And if we take that arrow away for a second, you can't really see the start of the Dugway, but it's a little steep too. So let's go on and take another look. This is a little easier to see the Dugway here. The Colorado River on the right, the Dugway, and then Lee's Backbone up and to the left. So Waddy Ligon was chugging along in his Model T, approaching the Dugway, and he started up that steep section, and his car stalled. And he backed up into a ravine and was crushed in the wreck. So buried here. We actually went looking for Chester Moon's grave in Citizen Cemetery once. This is what we found. Charlie Moon, his twin brother, someone's feet poking out there at the bottom. Another view of Charlie Moon. Chester's probably here right beside him, but he didn't get a headstone. Person who dies last often doesn't. So in 1929, there was a big change at the ferry, and that is Navajo Bridge opened. And Lee's Ferry became a backwater. Here's the original bridge on the right, now a pedestrian walkway, the new bridge over on the left, and the visitors area in the middle. Here's someone who was actually at the bridge dedication in 1929, or shortly after. Barbara McKee, a well-known figure from the Grand Canyon. Lovely, lovely photo. Here's her husband molesting a cactus, taken the same day. If you look in the background here, you can actually see the Priya Plateau in the background. So he's very close to Navajo Bridge. Of course, at this period, Eddie McKee was the Grand Canyon park naturalist and later became a prominent geologist. There are twin headstone in the South Rim Cemetery. Here's another South Rim figure, Elmer Nelson at the ferry. Elmer worked for the railroad and ran the power plant at Grand Canyon Village. He was an engineer. He's actually credited with taking this photo. So I like to call it a selfie. Here's his headstone at the South Rim. We don't know what his original headstone looked like. When his wife died and was buried next to him, the family put in this nice twin headstone, which has happened several times in the cemetery, perfectly normal. One more headstone I want to show you real quick. This is going to be the end of the story here. Philip Martin. And why do I show you this one? Died in 1965. Because this is where he died, at the Prairie Riffle at Lee's Ferry. Phil had put in his brand new canoe in a day in February 1965, launched with a friend. They were both wearing life jackets, and they came paddling down in their canoe and dumped in the Prairie Riffle. Well, the friend actually swam ashore and was fine, but Phil, he didn't want to give up his canoe, and he kept a hold of it. And his body was found about a mile downstream in an eddy of Cathedral Canyon. So here's Phil Martin in the back row there, the little short guy, one of the Glen Canyon Rangers, not Grand Canyon, Glen Canyon Rangers in 1965. They're staying in front of Lake Powell there. The lake is just filling. Ironically enough, that's about where the lake is now, but it's going the other direction. Phil was a diver, actually, had a lot of skills and high demand at the lake. This photo was taken 9 days before he died. But after the photo was taken, a bunch of these guys checked into the Albright Training Center at the South Rim. And Phil, the weekend rolled around, and Phil ran back to Lee's Ferry because that's where he was stationed, and his wife was there in a government trailer with their 2 kids. And that's when he launched at Lee's Ferry and died in the Prairie Riffle. If you're familiar with the employee housing area there, you know that looks right down on the riffle. His wife was actually watching when he dumped, and was, of course, buried here. Buried here, a Glen Canyon Ranger who never lived at the Grand Canyon, buried at the Grand Canyon because he was stationed at the Albright. Now you can see the nice airline memorial on the left. That's actually John Hance's headstone behind Phil's, and then his wife to the left. And just a close-up, Carol Ann Martin, Carla to her friends. Man, she was left in a rough spot when her husband died. She was a housewife with 2 young kids living in a government trailer that she had to vacate. Well, a couple of months after that, she took a job as a typist at Tootsie Goot National Monument. And she had a number of jobs for the Park Service over the years. She was working at Custer Battlefield as the administrative assistant when she got a call from the regional director, and he said, "I want you to be superintendent at Tootsie Goot." And she became only the 4th female superintendent in Park Service history, and actually the 1st in the Western region. Now, the South Rim Cemetery is not a great place for epitaphs, but this is an excellent epitaph, really fits her. And I'm going to end here with Catch the Wind. So we'll take some questions if anyone's still awake.
That was awesome.
Or if anyone's still here.
Yep, we're all still here.
Oh, I doubt it.
No, we are. That was great. I'm going to jump in first. I've got a couple questions. You showed a couple of really neat pictures of the ferry, not the ferry, but of Lonely Dell, the ranch where the cemetery is. One of them was from the air and one of them was of the ground. One was from 1969 and the other one was 1971. That looked like a regular farm.
Yeah, it was.
That was in 1961.
They even grew watermelons there. They grew all sorts of things.
Who was running it then in 69, 70, 71?
Well, actually, I think that might have been a consortium that was running it then. Before that, it was Gus Griffith, whose daughter is buried in the cemetery at the South Rim. I wish I had time to talk about that story, but yeah, people farmed. I mean, you know, the orchards down there. The orchard was actually in a different location than it is now, but yeah.
Was the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area responsible for that land at that time?
Lonely Dell was privately owned.
Okay.
The BOR actually, I think, owned the Lee's Ferry area minus Lonely Dell, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
And so the BOR turned over Lee's Ferry to the Park Service, and I've forgotten the exact year, but it was about the time that Glen Canyon got established. Phil Martin was a Glen Canyon Ranger there in 1965, so there was a presence there from Glen Canyon.
Yeah.
And so obviously they had they bought Lonely Dell at some point too. Right. I wish Phil Martin had been buried at Lee's Ferry personally, but yeah, obviously it was long closed.
Yeah. I also had a question about Curly Innes. You mentioned that he was on a 180-day wagon train ride from Idaho to Williams. Is there a record of that 180-day journey?
Just about what I've talked about. I've never found any detailed record, unfortunately. You know, I've never even, it'd be fun just to look up some of the crossing records just to see whether the Innes family is listed. But no, that's as much information as I know, as much information as I've ever seen. I don't think P.T. Riley has any more information. As a matter of fact, I don't even think he has that much.
The last question I have, I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, but you had a picture of this wagon full of alfalfa.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that would have been cut by hand, but in the 1920s, they might have had a cutter, some sort of a blade cutter drug behind a horse.
Yeah, it's possible.
Okay. Just a ton amount of handwork.
Yeah, it was a lot of work. That's why you had to have a lot of help.
Yeah.
I mean, farming was an important part of Ferry life, and raising livestock and keeping your bees and all the other accoutrements of frontier life.
Yeah, just amazing. Those are the questions that I had. The rest of you have questions, unmute yourself and come on in.
Like I say, everyone else is asleep. That's fine. I can
Not so fast.
Drone on and on.
Hey, Connie.
Hi, Tom. Yes, thank you so much, Kern. It was very interesting. I've been to Lonely Dell, but it's been several years. I usually just go and put my feet in the water at the Pariah Riffle, that rock that you showed. That's the one I sit on. Yeah. Is there a brochure there that talks about the people that are buried in the cemetery?
Not to my knowledge. I've got a book that has a chapter in it on Lee's Ferry. Yeah, here.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, you can't see it.
I can't see it.
That's just as well.
It's the invisible book.
Yeah, the invisible
Invisible
book. Yeah.
Yeah, because that would be nice. It would give people some information
No,
about
it's nice.
that are buried there in the cemetery.
P.T. Riley talks about everyone in the cemetery, but it's hard to dig the information out. If you've looked at his book, it's a trial to read. I mean, it's a wonderful book. I'm glad it exists, but it's a trial to read. And I think I have gathered it all in one spot. It makes it easier to read.
Oh, there was a brochure at one time.
Ruscio has a little bit on Ruscio's book on Lee's Ferry has a little bit about the people buried there, mostly because he stole it like I did from P.T. Riley.
Okay, I'll look at the visitor center the next time I go.
Yeah,
Thanks.
good.
Yeah, now I want to go there.
Good. It's a wonderful spot. There are just
Yeah.
dozens of hiking trails there too.
Mhm. It is nice. It is nice. Thank you so much.
Don't go in the summer. Go,
No.
go in
I'm
spring
in
and fall
Arizona.
and winter.
I know that.
Yeah.
And
Thanks.
Kern's book on the Lee's Ferry Cemetery and the Grand Canyon Cemetery is called In a Better Place, Cemeteries and Grave Sites of Grand Canyon. So if you're going to head to the ferry, get a copy of that book and take it with.
I have a question about the, well, that's a very good talk. Thank you so much. I have a question about the old vehicle carcasses that are found, that are associated with the cemetery.
Right.
What can you talk about those for a minute?
Well, if I had some time to look up my notes, I could tell you exactly what the vehicle is. We had a friend who identified the vehicle and said how old it was and so on. And I can't remember a single thing about it, except that it's obviously an interesting artifact. If you're interested enough, drop me an email and I'll dig that information out of my notes.
Very good, thank you.
What's your email, Kern?
It's my name all run together, Kern Nuttall @gmail.com.
Thank you.
I got a couple, but that's the easiest one.
Questions? Who's got questions?
Oh, what a relief. We're over. I think we better call it a night. My God, it's after 7. It's practically my bedtime.
Well, we could do that if there are no more questions out there. It's been lovely to have you all tonight. I want to thank Dick Brown is here, the president of the Grand Canyon Historical Society. Susan Collins is the moderator in the background that's letting you into this event and covering that. My name is Tom Martin. And Kern, thank you so very, very much for your wonderful presentation tonight. This time next month, Butch Farabee is going to talk about the Mountain Meadows Massacre.
Mountain Meadows Massacre. Man, I'm looking forward to that.
And we look forward to
Brave guy.
seeing everybody then. I'm just going to check the chat one more time to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Kern, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation.
Well, thank you for letting me talk. Like I say, I can drone on.
No droning, you did well.
Thank you,
All right.
Kern. It was really, really interesting.
Thank you.
Well, with that, we will conclude this virtual outing. Thank you all so much for coming. If you're not a member of the Grand Canyon Historical Society, you certainly should be. And have a good night.